this podcast, I want to do something that's it might be considered a little bit controversial. So, a lot of people ask me about the dynamics in there, when it comes to inmates attacking staff and staff attacking inmates. So, to kind of better explain it, I want to take two cases and then I'm going to go based on my 20 years of experience in there about possible situations that had led to one, the death of a correction officer, and two, the death of an inmate. So I'm gonna do this by just reading what they have already. And in this podcast right now, we'll deal with the inmate who killed the staff and some of the possible situations that could have happened based on the information that's been put out there. And then I'm just gonna give you the behind the scenes of particularly what could have happened and what historically I've seen happen when you're dealing with staff. Now, this first one, I'm just going to read it out. It says, Rashawn Cannon, a 27-year-old inmate at the Ross Correctional Institute in Chillicothe, Ohio, attacked and killed correction officer Andrew Lansing. Lansing was described as a long-time, well-respected employee who was loved by his colleagues. So they already established, based on what they put out, this is the prison, that this guy was a loving and, well-respected co-worker, right? So his narrative is already put out there that he was this great person. I don't know if he was or he wasn't, okay? I'm just telling you that this is what's put out there. Cannon, who had a history of disciplinary issues, was serving an 8-year prison sentence for assaulting a woman with a handgun. Following the incident, Cannon was transferred to a different facility while the investigation continues. And he also probably got his ass beat, because, you killed one of their staff members, right? So, again, I don't know, what happened. I'm just going to go based on what was presented by, basically from Ohio, from the prison, institutions out there. Because nobody's going to put anything about him, Cannon, what happened, what kind of a bit or what kind of time he was doing in there in regards to interaction with staff and other inmates. And then the second case we'll talk about in the next podcast is Robert Brooks, a 43-year-old inmate at the Marcy Correctional Facility in New York, was fatally beaten by multiple corrections officers. Here, because it was caught on camera, everybody now is on the side of the inmate because they can physically see what happened to him and that he was alive, and then they killed him. So you have all of these prison officials that are now giving statements saying how terrible that is. So on this spectrum, you have an inmate who was killed by staff that was videotaped, and so now everybody's on the side of the inmate, right? Because you don't want to condone that. And then over here, you have an inmate who he didn't use any weapons. That's based on what they explained. He didn't use any weapons. So, and he was on his way coming back from Child. This particular CO Lansing was sitting in what they have, these little booths so they can watch the inmates walk back and forth. I was across the street. Well, and Ross is in Chillicothe. Across the street is what they call Chili. It's the yard I was at. So we could see the yard from across there. And then we had inmates that either leave that yard and come over. Also, I want to kind of delve into the area that this particular yard is in, because people don't think that makes a difference, right? So Chile is predominantly a white area, middle to lower class area, and the type of staff you'll get that work there are often white. You have now a lot. You'll have Africans that have migrated, and they get jobs there and they work there. But this particular staff, coming as a New Yorker, is more like, I don't want to use a derogatory term because that would kind of label, but just white, what we grew up calling rednecks, but then I don't know if you want to consider that, the type of people that live over there, but it's that kind of Republican or, they don't really interact with inner city type individuals. So they're more like the type that go hunting and go to bars, and this is the type of staff that I encountered in Chillicothe, which was across the street from Ross. So the energy that they often gave up was this kind of what are you doing here, boy, type of energy. That matters because that's going to get lost in all of this. The presentation by the prison officials of this individual Cannon. So Cannon was in there for assaulting a woman, pistol whooping her with a gun. He got 8 years. Again, if you understand the judicial system, if he was such a menace, he wouldn't have gotten 8 years. He would have gotten a lot more. The individual that was in Brooks, he stabbed his girlfriend and he got 12 years. And even that, 12 years is not a lot. I mean, I have friends that you'll see on these podcasts, like Pork Chop, Robert Morris. He's got 51 years, and all he was in a car with a guy who got out of the car, decided to rob a store, ran back in the car. An undercover officer chased him, and he wrestled with the undercover officer and wound up getting his gun and shooting. And when they got back in the car, like, they just took off. So that's the only thing he did wrong. He got in the car. He didn't do anything. But because this individual had been doing armed robberies, like Pork Chop got hit with all of that because it was political. They want to make an example of a person who tried to kill a police officer. So the person that was with that person suffered the consequences as well. And he got 51 years. This guy stabbed his girlfriend. He got 12 years. This guy pistol whipped a woman. He got 8 years. So sentences vary when it comes to different individuals and in different circumstances and who you got as a judge. But in this case, the Cannon individual in Ross, he only had 8 years. He was 7 years left. So now the question has to be asked, what would make a person do that? And this is the aspect of the penitentiary or prison that people out here don't understand. And so you can only go to the actual relationship between him and Lansing. So right now, we're focused on Cannon. Cannon was in there. He's got 8 years, 7 years left. They put up that he had 12 conduct reports within a year. And two of them was had hooch on him, which is alcohol in it, which is very common. And he had a thing called K2. Now, K2 is a drug that has literally taken over the Ohio prison system. It is the closest thing that I can equate it to is growing up in New York is PCP dust. And I've done that growing up. Dust, when you smoke dust, you hallucinate. You see things that are not there. Now, I had somebody that I knew in a prison in London. And he was a good dude. They called him Preach. He wound up smoking that and wound up running across the yard butt naked. So you got to just think the kind of mindset for somebody who's going to put that in their system. Now I'm getting reports that, like, the fly stuff, with, you catch flies, that they were taking that. I remember when I left in 2021, when COVID was out, you had hand sanitizer. People were squirting that in there, and they were drinking. Like, this is a whole different mindset of addiction, of dealing with reality, or unable to deal with reality that I've experienced in other individuals, especially in the penitentiary. So this kid comes in there with 8 years. He's got 7 years to go. And 2 of those tickets towards the end, this is kind of how it's reading, was from Lansing. And one of them was threats on the phone. So if you're making a threat on the phone, either somebody's calling in to tell you that I threatened them, or they're listening. And if they're listening, that means you're being targeted. And so the question is, what are you being targeted for? Because people, you could say threats, and we don't understand that. Like the Ohio, in this case with the Ross and Cannon, they have to give you everything that's out there in regards to the case. But I guarantee you they're not going to. Because their first reaction is always to protect the officers, okay? And so you're not going to get that from them about what happened with him. How is he? I'm talking about Cannon. How is he as an inmate? All you're going to get is the conduct reports. They have yet to put out the history of the conduct report on Officer Lansing. So why this is critical to me, I'm going to tell you, is that when I was across the street at Chile, they had a CO there named, they called him Big O. And I'll try to get the last name, but that's all he was known on the yard for, was Big O. And the story behind Big O was that he had killed a black inmate in the hole. Like the same situation that happened to Brooks happened in Chillicothe with this CO Big O, who went into the hole. Whether he's dealing with the inmate might just had had enough and he's just going crazy or whatever in his cell, but they wind up killing him. Again, I don't know how true it is, but all the staff said it and they would talk about it. And you know, Big O was this like heavy set, he was fat, white CO, white hair. And he would walk around there like he was the fucking king. Like he knew that they were talking about him in that way. So when something like that happens, now you have a CO, and you have a lot of COs like that who don't like a certain type of individual. And then they get this job and they go in there, and their pleasure in life, whether at home is miserable or whatever, their pleasure in life is to go in there and fuck with inmates. So you got to think, if you go into a place, and I'll give an example of this. If I was, you know, I had my kid was on drugs and struggling to get off drugs, and me and my wife say, come to the house and we'll help you navigate through this, then, you know, our goal is to help you to get off drugs so you can find life. You know, you can find a productive life. So to get off drugs, you have to be able to go through a bunch of steps, because you have to train your brain. You have to train the life that you live, retrain it to remove drugs from your existence. I mean, that's basically what it comes down to. So, but if I told my kid to come home, and then they get there and I give them a bedroom and, you know, food and everything that's necessary, and then put situation in front of them where they could possibly have some programming that might help, but all I'm doing is being negative to them, me and my wife will continue to use drugs, and everything around that person, my child, is negative, that will cause them to have triggers. Like, that's the process, right? Now, how are they supposed to change? How are they supposed to, you know, get off drugs if I'm being negative? If I'm creating an environment of triggers around them, then, you know, they're pretty much fucked. Same thing goes for the penitentiary. If a person goes in there and they're struggling with drugs, clearly Cannon was struggling with drugs because he had a history of, like, he had done time before that where it says that he stole stuff from his family, his relatives, and he had a kidnapping charge. And, you know, you don't know what exactly was behind that. You hear kidnapping, and that just seems like you just grab somebody and you know, kidnap them. A lot of times it's just like holding somebody in place. You could put a gun on somebody, a knife on somebody. You could threaten somebody not to leave. And in Ohio, they will take that as kidnapping. So we don't know what his struggle was when it comes to drugs. We just know that he struggled with drugs during his first time in prison. So now he comes back, pistol whooping a female, and there was other charges, but he's got 7 years to go. And within 13, I think it's 11 months, he had 11, within a year, he had 11 write-ups, and 2 of them was the alcohol and the drugs. So clearly he's going in there and he's finding alcohol and he's finding drugs, particularly this K2 that I said does, like Angel does. Now, throughout the yards in Ohio, this is a problem, this K2, because everybody is using it. But every time somebody does something crazy on it, they want to punish the inmates. The K2 is getting in through the staff. Don't let anybody tell you any other way. They're getting in, it gets in there through the staff. You got staff that go in there. You got inmates who have no rehabilitation. So me, I'm hustling in the streets. I get in there. I realize the whole system is fucked up. You ain't really trying to help me, so I got to get some money, because when I get out on the streets, I got to have money. Because typically when I get out, like, there's no opportunities in there. So this is the defective thinking of an inmate that's going in there. So that's the mindset. I gotta get money. So inmates are always, not all inmates, but you're gonna have inmates that are gonna be willing to take chances even in there. And you can look it up. You got staff that get arrested all the time and wind up going to prison because they were bringing stuff in there. So this epidemic of K2 is in there, and it's throughout Ohio Penitentiary, and it's being brought in by the staff. Okay, so now you have Cannon a year in. Within that year, it's just chaos. Drinking, using K2, got into a fight. Like this, you can look at the individual if you're trying to and understand whatever they're going through. It's hell on earth. And now you're in there, you can't get out, you're stuck. So now you run into a CO like a O or some other CO, and you see them in there a lot. I guarantee when you find a CO that is kind or somebody who's really trying to help you, they're the rare person in there. This is in Ohio. And Arizona's a little different because, like I said in other podcasts, the racial aspect, the unity, like it could jump off at any moment against staff. They understand that, so they're more willing to try to, work with us to try to create a better quality of life. In Ohio, they don't give a shit. And so when you're in Chillicothe in that area, and you could Google it yourself, it's the type of individuals that you'll see them all the time. It's like the ones that drive around with the guns. And so if you make it a political thing, like you're Republican or whatever, and you say, well, fuck the inmates, okay. I said in other podcasts, they're getting out anyway. Do you want an inmate that's going to be rehabilitated or an inmate that's not going to be rehabilitated? So with that said, you get back to Cannon. Now he's sitting somewhere. He's got a life sentence. He went from having 7 years left to a life sentence. I believe what happened was, and again, they're not putting anything out, so we really don't know what happened. But from my history of doing time, and especially doing time across the street, same type of inmate, same type of staff, is that this individual was struggling with his addiction. He was struggling with processing his life. He had nothing in there that was going to help him. Now, I've Googled it and I've looked it up on the AI. There's programs in there. They have a program called Victim Awareness, which is really hard to get into because you got to have less than 5 years left. Other programs, the same. You might want to do carpentry. You got 8 years. They say, wait till you're under 5. And then you get in there and you still can't get inside because you have, like the victim awareness. I took victim awareness in there. And you have staff every week, they don't show up because they're just there to collect a check. I know you want to think that they're not. They're in there to try to, be guards and make sure that we get rehabilitated and that the whole institution is safe. No, they are the number one cause of conflict on the yard. So again, getting back to the analogy of the parent, if my child's there and I'm just constantly on them, I'm just going in there fucking with their shit. They're trying to get their head together. They're trying to think things through, and I'm constantly stopping them and out of that process. And just to take out whatever issues I got on my life, take it out on them. It's an impossible situation for them to rehabilitate. Again, you might not care, and that's on you. But in this case, we're looking at the facts. He was 7 years to go, and he did something now gives him a life sentence. The question is, would that have happened had the proper structure be in place in there? So when he gets in there, he doesn't have access to alcohol. He doesn't have access to this K2. And now his brain will start to clear up because that's the key to it. You got to be in a position, like out here in Tucson, you see these people walking around like zombies. And there's no incentive for them to stop because in Tucson, they got these things called blues. They have fentanyl in them. And they're $1 a piece. I guarantee you, if I took them across to New York, they'd be worth $25. So they stand on these corners, they beg for money, they get the money, and they go buy $10 worth of blues. And they go to the land of Oz for 24 hours, if not more. And talking to people, the blues are equivalent of, the fentanyl is equivalent to morphine, which was something you gave to soldiers in war when they got a limb blown off or something like that. So that's what they're dealing with out here. There's no incentive for them to stop. The same things when you go in there. If you're struggling with addiction, you need something in place that's gonna give you the start. And the start has to be you have no access to anything. And they don't build the structure in there that's gonna allow that. Because you go in there, the staff's bringing the drugs in, the staff is creating the chaos. Some staff, they just go in, like we had a guy that was from Africa, and he was morbidly obese. There's nothing he could do if I got into it with somebody and I was bashing their brains, and there's nothing he can do other than hit the microphone. And if I had enough time, he's not going to stop me. He can't even run across the yard. I've seen staff where there'd be a fight and staff can't run across the yard because they're fucking 200 pounds overweight. So again, I don't know what this Lansing type of CO he was. I know he gave him 2 tickets, and I know whatever it was, there was a trigger between this kid leaving Chow, seeing him, and then deciding he want, because that's what I believe happened. He went and he got into it, was beating him up, and whether he knocked him out and he hit his head, I don't know. They're not putting anything out, so we don't know. So in this part, I just want to put that out, that it's not always black and white. I think that they need to investigate this, and they need to put all the facts out on the table, including Lansing history inside there, and the interactions between him and Cannon. Like, they need to put it out there, what exactly happened, because what they're doing right now is tainting the jury pool. So now this kid Cannon is going to go to trial out there. The same officers that are in there is going to be the same jury that he's going to face. And now these people have had all this time to look at and hear about his conduct report. He had 11 tickets. I've had way more tickets than that. Just, you can get a ticket for keeping something on the window. If you get the right CO, we had it where, like, you have to wear IDs in Ohio to go from, child, wherever. You keep them on your shirt. Sometimes when you're scanning or whatever, you put them in your pocket, you're not thinking. I've been on yards and in Chile where if you had your ID in your pocket, they sent you to the hole. So now just think, you're situated in a cell or in a dorm. You got the bunk that you want. All your stuff is up there. And now you're coming from China. You accidentally put your fucking ID in your pocket, and the CO comes up and you cuff up. They send you to the hole. Now people are going to go back. I mean, I had respect on y'all, but there's people that didn't. So when they go in, the CO lets it be known that they're going to take your stuff. Like, they're coming to wrap their stuff. And a lot of times they might give an inmate in there. This is in Ohio. In Arizona, this would not happen. But in Ohio, they give an inmate the responsibility of packing your shit. And while he's packing your shit, you got other inmates that stand around, grab a CD, or back when they had CDs, grab something, grab some food, and then you go to the hole. For having your ID in your pocket, you get out, and you're missing food, you're missing appliances, you might be missing your sneakers, something, because they don't took your stuff. And you're supposed to just live with that over a fucking ID that was in your pocket. So, again, they're going to create this narrative behind this kid, but I am right now saying that they need to examine the entire process. They need to put all the evidence out there. Chambers, which is the lady that runs the prison system, called him evil. How do you know he's evil? I'm sitting out here and they don't touch these people that walking around getting high because they're victims, because they're struggling in their addiction. What's the difference going in there? You don't know if one of these people pull a gun on somebody and rob them. Okay, that's bad. You don't say it's not bad, but at the same time, they're in their addiction. They're in their process of struggling with drug addiction. And I've had family members that dealt with the same thing. So that person does that and goes to prison. Are they an addict? Are they evil? What are they? It's whoever's defining it. The case in point in Brooks in New York. The camera's there, so all of a sudden the staff is evil because they know that the masses out here are seeing it, and that it becomes a political thing. But if there was no cameras, I guarantee you, if there was no cameras, then they would say Brooks resisted, Brooks this, Brooks. They would put all of the blame on the inmate Brooks. Now, you might be listening to this and wondering, yeah, am I pro-inmate? Hell yeah, because I understand how these things get to that point where you're 7 years to go and you wind up doing something. Now you got a life sentence, regardless of what you're in there for. So in this podcast, that's all I wanted to outline was that this kid is about to go to trial, and I need them to put everything out there. If you're ever going to change the prison industrial complex, you got to start at the ground level. You got to start presenting, incidences that happen in there in their purest light, so people could understand what it is that inmates go through, not just the staff. So with that said, I'm going to go on to the next podcast, and we're going to analyze the Brooks incident, which is a lot different. Well, it's different presented to the media than the Cannon, but If you feel any way about this, you know, write the people in Ohio and let them know you want to see the entire process of this Cannon trial presented, all the evidence. You want to know all the evidence in any situation that deals with inmates and staff or just deals with the prison system as a whole. So with that said, I thank you for tuning in, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.